and welcome to Multivirtual 2020's Right Track. I'm Vanessa Junta. I am the director of the Right Track, and this is judging a book by its cover, what makes for great covers. So your book cover is usually the first thing a reader judges your book on, so it's incredibly important to get it right. Our panel of authors and artists will be talking about what to look for in a cover and how to work with your cover artist. You'll learn about things from genre cover expectations to online requirements for a cover and your relationship with your cover artist. So if you're watching this as part of the convention weekend stream, I encourage you to come join us over on the Discord server in the Right Track channel, where we'll be having a watch party with some of the panelists, and we can all hang out and watch the panel together. Information on how to get onto our Discord can be found at multiversecon.org/Discord. So every year we choose a charity to donate to, and this year we're giving to the Equal Justice Initiative. You can help us by donating at our Ko-Fi site, and that is ko-fi.com/multiversecon. All donations minus fees will go to support the Equal Justice Initiative, and you can find out more about them at eji.org. And don't forget, for more about our panelists, you can check out the links below. And also you can go to multiversecon.org, where you can find links for all of our guests for this year. And finally, would you like some multiverse swag? While you're at the website, check out the store, because there's some really cool stuff in there, from t-shirts to masks and enamel pins and all kinds of really cool stuff. So be sure to check it out. So now I'm going to pass it on to our moderator for this panel, Liz Gorinsky. Thanks.
Sure. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for judging a book by its cover. So you've probably seen our more extended intros, but let's go ahead and do like 15-second introductions about sort of where we're coming from. Let's do this alphabetical by first name, so starting with Ellie.
Oh, hi, I'm Ellie Raine. I am a fantasy author. My books are the award-winning fantasy series, The Necrosine Chronicles. I write about reapers, demons, and dragons.
You can go ahead, Galen.
Hi, I'm Galen. I'm an artist and illustrator. I've been working in the industry about 7 years. I do artwork for Strange Horizons, Lightspeed Magazine, Uncanny Magazine, Daw Books, HarperCollins Books, and Subterranean Press.
Hi, I'm Marc Abbott. I am an independent self-published author. I mostly write horror fiction. My latest book, Hell at the Way Station, is out now, and yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Hi, I'm Tyra Burton. I'm a professor of marketing. Oh, I forgot how to talk. Marketing at Kennesaw State University. I publish nonfiction and fiction, and mostly I write science fiction and fantasy.
Awesome. And I'm Liz Gorinsky. So I currently work as been a speculative fiction editor for my whole career. I was at Tor Books for quite a long time, and I'm now I founded and I'm the publisher and an editor at Erewhon Books, an independent speculative fiction press, and also act as the art director there for the titles that I'm working on. I'd love to start by talking about kind of what role you've played in the cover art process. It sounds like we've got a lot of writers, so I'd love to get the sort of spread of kind of like coming at it from the artist perspective, plus writers, and like what they've been able to contribute to that process. And I can talk a little bit about the AD role in there.
I, as the artist of book covers, I have a little bit to do with the creating of a book cover.
A little bit.
But it's a very interesting role in that it is taking the literary work of the author and translating it into this single readable image that a person in a bookstore or online will see, that will draw them in to be like, ooh, oh, I want to read that. And it's a very interesting, delicate, awesome process coming from the visual side of it. So that's my quick lead into what I do for book covers. So.
Yeah, I'm a hybrid author, so I have some works with small presses, and well, I currently one small press. I originated with my fantasy series in another small press, and eventually I took the rights back for that particular story, and I do that myself now. So I've seen both sides of how the process works and what a publisher has to do to go through and work with a cover artist and how exactly they go about doing that. I also began my journey as a graphic design artist, so I kind of know a thing or two about the process of designing and all the intricacies behind it. So I have a lot of appreciation for what you guys do, seriously, because oh my gosh, it's so much work. And I love you guys to death for putting up with us and all of our, can you change these 10 things about it like every week? So yeah, totally appreciate working with you guys and your patience.
Well, as an independent, as a self-published author, I have a lot of, I work very closely with any cover artist that I decide to go with. Usually I just map out exactly what it is that I want. Sometimes I will get inspiration from other covers or movie posters because I'm a huge movie fan, and I'll send like a small file and just say, this is what the story is about. These are some of the ideas that I'm thinking, and then just give it to the cover artist. And if they say, hey, I have some ideas, then we'll collaborate. I'm always open. I feel that I get more out of it when the artist gives me their original interpretation of my work, rather than just going, oh, I like everything that you've given me, I'll just make a carbon copy of that. So normally for me, it's a much more intimate relationship that I have. And particularly if I find somebody I really like working with, then after a while, I don't have to tell them. They kind of know what my style is and go from there.
I'm also independent. So the cover artist that I've worked with, I found out that if I just let her go, like you said, just, tell her the basics and see what she comes up with, 9 times out of 10, she's going to be right. And she's going to be seeing the market in a way that I don't see the market. Yeah. But I also do work as a author consultant in marketing. So I review a lot of book covers and say, these are the things that are happening within the genre. These are the trends that you need to think about. And then I'll look at specific book covers and go, this is kind of my take on what your cover artist did. So I've seen it both from the author perspective and then from a kind of an outside consultant's perspective as well.
Yeah, and I guess I've done it working on covers from both the editorial perspective and the AD perspective, and sort of the second mush together. From the editorial side, often we would be like, we did have a cover concept that we would fill in, and that was often sort of discussing the book almost most from a marketing perspective, kind of like what the market needs of the book were. And then I would say that like, working on the commissioning side of things, it would run from like starting with kind of gauging author involvement and then like putting that together into a form where we knew what we were looking for, then hunting for the artist and then progressing from there. And I think all these steps are worth getting into a little bit more. I'd love to kind of step through and like sort of, I guess, do the macro scope of like maybe those of you who have either started with an artist search or have been part of like an author that is involved in an artist search. What kind of questions do you ask at the very beginning of that process when you're trying to identify sort of either what style of artist you're looking for or particular things that you want to make sure are part of the illustration or the tone of the illustration?
For me, I used to just give a huge paragraph of description of the scene I was thinking of in my head. And they're very beautiful scenes, don't get me wrong. So like, this is the actual painting that the cover designer and her artist did, which was great, fabulous, but wasn't really selling as well as we were hoping. So like, eventually we kind of just said, okay, we're thinking of redoing things. So how would you go about making a book cover that is kind of a gothic fantasy adventure story? And that was the key phrase that we just needed to give her. It was like a really simple phrase of the genre we were going for and the tone we were going for. And like freaking like, bam, like she nailed it, man. She nailed it. It was fabulous. And like, this is an actual scythe I made. And we were like, hey, can you just put this in here? And like put magic on it? And she freaking did it. She is absolutely amazing. And I love what you guys do, because I don't know, man, as authors, I feel like we overcomplicate pictures because we just want to describe every single detail. But we kind of just got to let go, step back, and just be like, here's the tone and the image we're going for. Show us what are your ideas on this? It's like, it's kind of amazing sometimes, honestly.
Well, and I think as indie authors, when you're looking for a book cover and you're trying to decide what artist to work with, you really just have to start looking at their work and seeing if there's covers out there that you think are well done and who did them, and then looking at artists' portfolios to really get a sense of how they see the world. Because most artists even have some, you can tell, like I know there's an artist that we work with and I know when I see her cover in somebody else's book, I'm like, that's her. Because she just has a feel about her. And obviously it's a feel that I really like, but I think that's where you have to start off with, is kind of getting an idea of what you want in a cover artist in terms of their portfolio and I think I is the key word.
Yeah, so I guess I'll speak a little bit from the sort of publisher side of things. And our first step in the process is, but there's varying degrees of how much you either want to or let the author get involved. And we tend to be on the kind of high end of that, in that we seek kind of their opinions at the beginning and like make sure that they're on board with everything across the process. So we start with a simple survey. And I always give the disclaimer, we can't promise that we're going to listen to your opinions, but we will ask you what they are. And like, because ultimately as the publisher, it is our job to mediate and make a piece of art that's going to sell the book. And that might mean that some artists have great visual instincts, some authors have great visual instincts, some authors have terrible visual instincts. So sometimes we ask some opinions and we take one element from that. And sometimes, we get a great header and like that gives us everything that we need to start working. But some of the questions that we ask at the outset are, did they want to see a particular scene or more of a mood or a concept driven cover? If they have particular comparisons either to particular books or even like artists that they love that like are the thing that they've always envisioned for their own book, anything they particularly care about, be it typography or color palette or like strong associations that they want, and anything that they should know. So it's always good to, I think, at the beginning, if you're commissioning for another author, to like just figure out if they've got any trigger points that, are they particularly concerned with a historical period, or are there objects that really need to look a certain way? So that's kind of us opening up the window for them to tell us anything that they need to kind of just like make sure that we hit the important points correctly. And then we start with our artist search. It sounds like a lot of you kind of have folks that you've worked with on a steady and repeated basis. At Erewhon, we have many different modes and styles. And so that means like looking for a completely different look for each book. The way that we've dealt with that is that we basically have an Airtable with visual database of artists. And I think at this point it's got, I don't know, like 300 to 500 artists on it, and some keywords and like indication of whether they're specifically graphic designers or specifically art creators or typography people, map people. But a lot of it is really just like looking at the sample images that we've collected for people and trying to find the one that looks right. And then starting to reach out to the first few people with like, hey, are you actually available for this project? Does it sound interesting? And usually at that point, we'll maybe get a short list of like 7 to 10 people, then write to our top 3 and then see what the responses are. And that's the point, I think, at which the artist gets involved in the process. So Galen, do you want to talk about like sort of approaches that ways people have approached you, how that's gone from the moment that you're either looked at for the project and when you start thinking about it?
Yeah, thank you. And I actually, depending on who the client is, the process will vary just a little bit. I have some clients where these are just like I'll do magazine illustrations where I just get a short story and I have a tremendous amount of creative, like they just give me the short story and I'll send them the sketch and then I send them the final art and I have the full almost full control at that point to just read the story and visually interpret it my way. And then on the other end of that spectrum is like I'm doing illustrations for a couple of HarperCollins projects where you have the art director and then the editor and the author, and it becomes kind of this very collaborative, like, okay, here is the imagery, here is the tone, here's the characters, the setting, and all of that. And then everywhere in between, because I also work with independent authors who are like, hey, how do you do this? How do we do this? For me, though, specifically in those cases, what is very helpful to me is to have their literary story, if they take the time to do a little bit of translating into images already. Like when, as part of the art brief, send me examples of other covers that you like the tone of. Maybe send me a few examples of the characters in your mind, kind of what they look like in your mind. Like the art brief, I like it where there is the translation from the written word to some sort of easy visual, because that's a translation. That's a transition. That's, you know, sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. And I find it easiest when we're kind of on the same page with, here's what, when you say this, here's in your mind kind of what you have an idea of what it looks like. And then from there, it's the process of, here, now I do my version and I send it to you to kind of get an idea of, are we on the same page? Am I speaking to what your translation in your mind is?
Yeah,
and it's a process. It's a definite process.
I think for me, I actually found a new artist quite recently who actually reached out to me. In my mind, it's not so much the image of what's in the story, but the artwork itself. Like I have a thing where I like the cover to be extremely moody. Like, you know, a lot of lines, a lot of like gruff looking, you know, kind of characteristics. And I often find it hard to find artists to convey that. A lot of times people will send me something, I'm like, yeah, this just looks a little too, it's a little too clean. I need it to look a little more, you know, rugged or rough. And normally when I can't find that, what I've had to do is usually fall back. I have an artist who does everything with models. You know, he does backgrounds and he takes photos of people, and those work. But this guy that I found recently, like, completely blew me away. Like, it was almost like he went inside my head and knew exactly what I was looking for. And I was in just an utter shock when I got the work back. And for me, it's easy for me to give description. It's easy for me to tell you, well, this is the scene, this is, but beyond that, it's the artist. I leave it to the artist to give me everything that they have, and 9 times out of 10, I'm like thoroughly impressed by that.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just quickly mention that I do think that there's like a really wide range about that. Like almost every artist does seem to want some kind of translation as you describe it, though I think that some artists do vary on how much they like to drink from the well. So we'll always make the manuscript available. And I think some people dip in to get a sense of the tone. Some people might never read any of it and just like rely on the materials that we provide. I think we've defaulted to just giving as much material as possible, ranging from here's some potential scenes, here's some character descriptions, and then so that the artist can pick kind of what they want. And some of that is also because we're working with new people each time. I imagine if we have, we've just started like our first like few series. So in those cases, we do have, I think you develop more of a shorthand where you don't need to describe as much because you've got that like language built in, and you've already got one successful project, hopefully, so you can build from there.
I will say, and it doesn't always work this way, I will say that my preference is, if I have the time and the ability, I love to have a chance to just read the story, the book, the novel in its entirety, personally, just because I, first of all, love to read. But also I find my own level of nuance sometimes to the things that speak to me as an artist. That is not always, available time and space-wise. And sometimes also the nuances and things that I'm like, ooh, I'm going to do this as the art piece. Oh, I love this. I'm going to do this. And then ultimately the artist and the author, or the art director and the author are like, well, actually, as the publishers, we'd prefer it to go this direction. So it really, really does just depend. But my favorite is honestly to be able to read the work if I get the chance.
Yeah. So we usually do have one sort of stopgap phase in the middle of that to just make sure everything's on the right track, and that's the sketch phase. And so I'd love you all to talk about sketches, either creating them, responding to them, what you've seen in the range of sketches.
I like sketches. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I love sketches actually, because it gives me, it's not the completed process, but if it's a really, really good sketch, you can almost fill in everything that's going to go in around it. And the exciting part is if I get a really good sketch, I'm like, you know what, I just keep going, because I can't wait to see what you come up with. I try not to let it get to the point where they're about to color it, because then I would hate to get to that phase and to be like, yeah, by the way, the cat in the corner, I see the color, I'm not feeling it. But I absolutely adore the sketches, because it gives the artist and I an opportunity to move things around, and or just for me to say, you know what, you're on the right track. It's just knowing you're on the right track.
Yeah.
And I'm not feeling like, oh, you did this whole cover, you handed it to me, and I'm like, this is not what, because that's happened a couple of times where people have just gone straight ahead and then given me something. I'm like, yeah, this is completely not what I was thinking. And, you know, I mean, as a writer, it takes a lot to deal when an editor is telling you, okay, you got to take care of all of this. I hate to be that guy to tell the artist, look, great work, but you're gonna have to throw this away and start all over from scratch, because that's a lot of work. It really is. So I love the sketch phase.
Yeah, that's just the rule of basically art in general. Always make a concept thumbnail.
Mhm.
Always. Because you know, you need to map out where everything's going to go, including the text, because typography is part of the cover design and all that. So like, you want to make sure you leave enough room for that, so it's not covering up someone's face or some kind of important thing that might be included in the cover. And like, I recently just did my own art for a children's illustration book for my daughter, and I was so glad that I just stuck to my usual art school rule. Always make a concept thumbnail of all these things and just cut out all the text that's going to go in there, arrange the text, and then make the actual art. Because if you make the art and it doesn't fit with the text, you have to start all over multiple times if you try it again. It's so much better for the process and for everyone involved to see where you're going first without doing all of that work. It's just storyboarding. That's what it is.
Mhm.
We just went through this with an indie author that I'm friends with. She's changing the direction of a series. And so she needed to change what the covers look like, but still make them look like they're part of the series. And we had a lot of back and forth between her and I and her cover artist. And I really like what we ended up with, but what we started with it wasn't where we needed to be. So I think absolutely having mock-ups or storyboards or whatever, just so you can kind of make sure everybody's there. And what we really thought that what she originally went with was going to look great. And it didn't. It really didn't.
Yeah, and I guess just to clarify for folks that have not participated in this process, I think that the sketch phase can run anywhere from here's the one idea, like, do you like this, should we go ahead, to here's 3 or 4 like things that show the general shape of it. And like,
yeah, that's what we do with our artist.
Yeah, the level of detail like can vary a ton. Like I've seen things that are literally like almost stick figures, and some that are just like sort of like almost like sort of pencils for a comic book. We work with a number of designers who will you know, they will send a sheaf of like 7 things that could be a finished cover, basically, and then you pick between them, and then you kind of refine and pick out the details. So it varies a ton of what you're seeing at the sketch phase. What do you do, Galen? What do you provide usually?
Yeah, basically, occasionally it'll be just the one sketch, but the standard is typically to try and give at least 2 to 3 preliminary sketches, and I do them in black and white, and refined enough so that you can get the general idea. But these are just sketches, but 2 to 3 where there's distinct differences between them, where these are different directions that the cover can go. And then what I ask is, which one of these do you lean towards most? Are there any edits that you want me to make, things that you want me to take out or put in, you know, things that I maybe didn't get right? And it's just basically the start of the conversation, like the start of our actual artistic conversation back and forth is those 2 to 3 sketches. And then usually it's like, sometimes it'll be like, oh, we love this one, it's awesome, go with it. But usually there'll be some small things like, oh, you know, this person's like, this sword should be in this hand, or, you know, the tattoo should be on this side, or once or twice I have read the race of a character wrong as I've been reading it. Like that might not have been explicitly stated. And then later on it was like, actually, no, this character needs to be, this appearance. But we take care of all of that in just the easy black and white phase. And then the next thing that I will submit will be a color sketch where I'm starting to refine and tighten things up, tighten the yarn up. It's not a finished piece yet, but you're starting to also see, here's what the color palette of the piece will be. It's tighter and now it's got color. You can see what that's going to be like. And that gives us the next stage to be able to have like, hey, how is this going? Anything that needs to be changed here, you know, anything that needs to be tweaked. And once that's been approved, at that point, typically I jump into the final painting process. And with all of that information and everything that I've done, I work to then make it a completed painting. And when I say painting, I am doing this digitally, but it is a painting for me. Yeah. That's my process generally.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I do want to underscore Mark's point here is that, like, I think one of the most important thing for everybody at that early stage is like, are the basic pieces where you want them? Because it's so much easier to change it early than to like have a finished thing and then go back and like reconfigure what you're doing.
And I'm not the person, like I'm actually not doing any of the graphic design. I'm not putting in the title treatment or anything. So in general, I'm keeping that in mind, but I'm really counting on them to be like, hey, does this work with what we want title treatment wise? And does it need to be edited? And that's, yeah, I'm really, really counting on them for the most part to let me know that. Even though I'm in general keeping it in mind, I don't have the actual title treatment. I'm not doing the actual title treatment. So that's an important part of the conversation very early on.
Yeah. Yeah, like as an indie publisher who's also been like learning this as we're going, that's also a thing that gradually we realize that there's more and more details that like, oh, we should be talking about the dimensions at this point and the color space and like all of these things. And now we've built a document that has like basically here's all the specs that you need in one place, so you like know what's going to happen down the road. But like there's, you know, like a lot of considerations. One of them is the type treatment. So I guess let's talk about like in most cases, do you all use like separate graphic designers for type? What do you do specifically in the range of type or picking out what goes on the cover to make it that final sell piece?
Our cover artist does both the artwork and the typography for us as well. And if not, my co-author actually has done a lot of typography herself, so she will sometimes play with it. But in general, we let her go with that because her main thing that she is a cover artist. So that's like 90% of the artwork she does. So she's used to understanding what typographies are going to work, what fonts are going to work, where should they be placed. So we let her run with it because that's her wheelhouse. I can tell you if it doesn't look quite right, but I trust her to know the first pass where it should go.
Yeah, ours does that too. So she kind of has like a team that works with her. So she's got a painter who paints for anyone who requests those. She herself goes through stock images or creates images herself, depending on what price point and package you ask for. And there's also a formatter that she works with for that. We have basically used all of them because, you know, they have great instincts. what they do is fabulous. They have a lot of experience behind them. And they, you know, Fiona herself does do the text along with the design. So that's a huge deal. And she can, it's really cool to me how much of a difference a metal, sharp looking text can look compared to like a flat glowing text.
Yep.
They're both fabulous, but they look so different. So they give like this incredibly different feel to the same artwork. It's incredible to me. It's like, wow, okay. Typography is important, y'all.
Very.
Yeah, most of the time the cover artist does the typography for me. I really never even think about the typography. I oddly enough, I never think about how the lettering should look, or, you know, should it be a particular size or any. I just let them go with it. My thing is always just as long as it all fits. You know, the only other thing I know, one time years ago when I first started, someone pointed out to me that the particular font that an artist used it didn't look right with the cover. I mean, I was just happy to have a cover. I didn't even think, and they were like, well, you know, people buying this book are gonna think based on the way this is written, it's one thing, and the book is not about that, it's about something else. And I was like, wow, I never thought about that. So so I kind of know, I guess the artists that I work with, they know the industry, or they know what works. So they'll, you know, I don't think I've ever gotten anything back and I'll be like, why is the wording looking like that? Or I've suggested, hey, I'd like to have this, and they're like, yeah, no.
Yeah, can you imagine if Lord of the Rings was done in Comic Sans?
Oh.
Just slap it on there.
And it's just like, hey, wait, what? And yeah,
It would be pretty bizarre.
It would. I mean, I guess that would be the one thing that makes you want to look at the cover and just go, wait, what is this?
Well, I mean, in that case, maybe it'd be like, oh, they're looking at it.
Yeah.
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 It matters so much.
Yeah.
I think there's a few different routes that we can go, which we can discuss. And like, I think, we'll get into genre in a little bit, but I think in science fiction and fantasy has a much higher rate of like image creation for covers than a lot of other genres. Because we're a house that does like literary and speculative fiction, sort of the span of that, I think we do use a lot of designers, but for the most part, we'll hire the design for one process and then get a designer for the second part of the process. And that can also depend a lot about sort of like what the particular resources of the house are. So a bigger house will probably have 3 or 4 full-time designers who will basically, it's their job that once the art comes in, they'll be doing the type design over that. But there is one more part of the process that I'd love to get into, which is the if there's publisher and sales involvement at that point and what that looks like. So for us, we have kind of a regularly scheduled art meeting that happens about a month before our sales conference meeting. And that's showing off things that are probably somewhere between the finished art and like, let's say, typography sketch phase. So we might show, here's the first 3 options that we have for the typography, or here's the direction that we're thinking of going in. But we also spend a lot of time at that point talking about, here's the title, what's the subtitle? Is that communicating what we wanted to? Do we have a quote? Is everything big enough? Is it like, can we, you know, like, is this going to look good on both a digital bookshelf and a physical bookshelf? And so that's where I think the, like, I guess, publisher or seller of the book comes in. Anybody have any experiences they want to talk to in that space?
I've gone through like 3 different cover designs myself for this one series. The first cover, I had some say about it because it was with my original publisher. Actually, hang on. I was gonna show the difference because they're all so different around the clock. This is the original cover from the publisher, and it's not exactly accurate to the character, but I really like the color scheme. You know, I really like the orange with the gray. It's not at all what the character looks like, but I thought it was pretty cool. And so when we did get the rights back and we did it ourselves, I decided, hey, let's try and make it accurate. So this was what the cover artist did, and I absolutely love it. It's super accurate to the characters, and it has both the male and the female character in it because it goes over female and male, you know, both. So I liked that. It wasn't really getting us the sales, and it, you know, as much as I love it, it wasn't getting us the sales. So we tried the new thing, as I mentioned before, and this thing, we kind of sold both of these things side by side at conventions. And we said, hey, you can either get the old cover for $5 off, or you can get the new cover for $5 more than this one. Only one person out of 25 got the older one. Everyone said, oh, I fully understand. I want that pretty cover. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you guys. That right there, it sucks that people do judge a book by the cover. But at the same time, man, look behind me at all these books. We like showing that off. As readers, we love showing off the books that we have. Look at my pretty, beautiful books that I love. So I'm keeping them up there, you know? So it's kind of like a prideful thing with readers too, to think about, which also at the same time, we also discovered having just words on the spine, might want to consider putting some artwork on the spine for the sake of bookstores, because they're going to probably put them spine out first.
Right.
So probably a good idea to put some artwork on the spine just for that sake.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess like one final element I'd love to, sorry if I'm jumping on anybody, but like think about like basically book as package, and I think that does range from like basically looking at it like from the your quotes on the back, your spine, so like basically the establishment of the final mech is going to come at some point where you figure out kind of what all of those components are, like which author photo you're using, and like so that's not exactly the cover, but it is. This is probably depending on where people are buying books. The other parts are going to do as much of a job of selling the book as the initial cover image is, though that makes a big difference about like whether it's going to be the digital image they're seeing primarily, you know, if it's going to be a piece that is on in a digital magazine, again, that's like different than a physical book that people are picking up. And I think finally the effects that people are choosing. So it makes a big difference if you've got kind of like a matte cover with spot gloss and like a metallic treatment or embossing, or like all, there's so many things that you can do, all of which can have like a very staggering effect about the way the art is received at the end point. So what about those finishing stages? Like any thoughts about that?
I actually have two different author shots for when I write fiction and when I write nonfiction, because it's a different look, you know, what people expect from an author. So when I write nonfiction, it's much, well, slightly more professional, but nothing is terribly professional when you have pink hair, but it looks more in that vein. But the one that I have for my sci-fi, it has like a glow at the bottom, and it looks like a sci-fi author picture should look. So you kind of want to meet those expectations. So I know for me, I at least change things up. And I think that spine art is so like neglected, because you can get so many people looking at the spine when they don't turn your book out, that you really have to think about what it looks like. And typology comes back to play there, I think.
I have a love of the graphic design elements that can be incorporated into the art. Like you were talking about the high gloss spots or embossing, or, you know, gold leaf treatments. And, you know, I've never had the opportunity to actually do any of that in the print versions of my artwork, but that is a special, delightful little thing that I'm so glad it's being utilized, and would like to eventually, you know, dabble in myself.
Yeah, one day I will have those pretty foil and embossed covers.
I learned a very, very valuable lesson about book covers. My very first self-published book was based on a play that I wrote, and I literally took the cover from the playbill and put it on the cover of the book, with the idea that because people knew the play, you know, it really wasn't something that I gave a lot of foresight to. I went to a book fair. People were looking at the table and somebody came to me and it was like, okay, no disrespect, but you need to get rid of this cover. And I'm like, what? And they're like, get rid of this thing. It looks like a child's book. And it's not bad art, but they were like, this is not, if this is supposed to be an adult novel, that's not what this says. And I went and found another, I found a guy who does professional covers. I sent him what the artist did, and he's like, yeah, we're not using this. He's like, I got a completely different format. And again, like the entire wraparound, it was like one full cover with the art along the side of the spine. And I'm sitting there like, wow, I didn't even think, I never thought about as an independent author, because that's not something, I'm just worried about getting the book done. I never even thought about that the cover was going to actually impress so many people. And then, of course, when I printed the book with the new cover, it started flying off the tables, and it's like, you couldn't, like, I had the same situation. I literally was like, well, I have the old cover here. If you're interested in no. I'm getting, that's the same book. Yeah, no, I'm good with this one over here.
Yeah, fun fact too. We discovered, because we've been going back and forth at Barnes & Noble, we're trying to learn how exactly do you accept self-published authors or indie published authors or small published authors to actually be shelved across the states. Like, how exactly would we go about doing that? So they've actually been working with us and given us some really awesome advice. One of the things they say is, we tend to lean more towards things that have pretty spines because it will be spined out starting off.
Right.
So the more books you sell at Barnes & Noble, the more they're going to order your stuff. And if you don't have any art on your spine or anything pretty on your spine, and you're right next to other people with that pretty stuff on their spines, they're going to gravitate toward there. Like, where's your eye go to? It goes to the face, not the text. It goes to the face. Just anything with pretty art rather than just text. We've had to learn the hard way. Apparently Barnes & Noble encourages this, so they are more likely to shelve your stuff if you do that. So that's another thing for the self-published, because we're learning this on our journey.
Galen, since you've experienced the range of this, I wonder if you could talk at all about, like, I guess the distinction between creating an art piece that is purely illustrative for a free story versus a thing that's going to be a product eventually.
There's not too much difference on my end. Like, when I'm creating something, even if it's probably going to be just viewed online digitally, like via an online, like I'm trying to think, a Fireside magazine for the most part was just an online print medium, but I was still creating the art if I wanted to, I could print it, because I oftentimes I would turn these into large, art prints. Does that get to your question? Are you talking about like the creation of art to be like a
sort
print
of
project?
But I suppose one of the other elements is like sort of the size and detail of the image and like what you can do with that.
You know what? For me, it is the same.
Okay, interesting.
I am incorporating the same amount of detail into something that might just be viewed via the masses online versus something that's print. For me, it's both the same, because ultimately for me, they may both actually be print products that are, like fine art products that I will be selling as fine art pieces.
That makes sense.
Which is how I tend to view my art. Like, I'm doing it for the client for this specific story, but I am also doing it as an art piece that I will share as my art. So in terms of my processing, I am doing them both to the same level of detail and degree.
Yeah. So I suppose there's like two factors I'd love to talk to from the publisher perspective, which are both like thinking about, this might look like the most gorgeous thing ever when it's full blown or you're seeing it in a physical project. But like we learned as of a few years ago, you've always got to look at something as like, what is the 100px wide version of this going to look like? Both because that's what people are going to see if they're buying it from an online retailer. And if you're doing advertising for the book, you've got to be able to reduce it small enough so that it's visually legible. So that like you both have the increasing detail of like the pressure of it needing to be like simpler so that you can sell it in that fashion. And then on the total other side of things, I think the growing influence of bookstagrammers and booktubers and how that plays into it. And I think we've been lucky to like have a bunch of covers that have been immensely picked up all over book Instagram, and the detailed tableaus that people will create with physical books that like, and that becomes a tool of selling all in and of itself. If you make something that is attractive enough that people want to make their own art around it, then like, you know, I think that becomes the sweet spot in and of itself. So you've got to get a thing that is like on the small end, like can be super simple, but on the large end inspires other people to kind of like, you know, help you promote your book.
Not to mention
For me,
merchandising.
that's actually, oh, sorry, Ellie.
I'm just saying, not to mention merchandising. Like, you're gonna put it on a shirt. Hope it lasts. Hope it looks great. I hope it's not blurry. That's got to be 300 DPI, like minimum, dude, for it to look any good on a shirt.
I did want to mention briefly, you were talking about having it read as a thumbnail versus read as a large-scale, fully printed art piece. That is a very strong consideration that needs to be taken by the artist at every step in the process. That, yes, here is all the incredible detail that you're putting into it if it's going to be writ large and print huge. But it is only going to be a better piece of art, and it's essential for the marketing of the book that it also reads that thumbnail. That all of those details, when compressed down and viewed tiny, they have to work as a strong design even when viewed tiny. It's essential that that's taken into account at every step in the process.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if a good cover can help you like brand all of your social, because that's my wheelhouse, is just being able to take that cover and take elements from it and use it for swag, use it for branding on social media, use it for profile pictures, cover pictures. I built a website with one of our book covers as the background because the background was so pretty, and she gave me that to work with it. So I think it's so important to understand that it's not just a book cover. If you're doing a series, you're doing something like that, it's got to go across all those platforms. So
Yeah, you want to talk about great example at Twilight, just the Twilight book covers. Look at this, simple, effective. Like this uses the KISS method, which is keep it simple. Focal point, red. Everything else, grayscale. It's the perfect visual that just draws your eyes straight to it. And it's not overly detailed. You know what it is. You can tell what it is from afar, even in a tiny thumbnail. It's like, you want to talk about a part of why the Twilight Saga was such a success for the books? Those covers are striking, and you wouldn't think much of it, but they're actually very visually striking because they're simple. They're so simple, but that adds to the power of it.
And I think something like that can actually just change the entire industry and its direction for a decade. I think Twilight, like you would still see the effects of either more photographic, sort of that particular typography, even like certain fonts that get prominence because everybody's like, well, I want to, the role that comparison titles play in our industry is huge. And often you've got to be like, okay, so how do I convince the people, a small fraction of the many, many people that bought Twilight to buy my book if it's remotely in a similar universe? And I guess that leads us into, I'd love to talk about the questions and constraints of genre. What are the particular genres that we're writing in or publishing or promoting or creating art for? How does that play into our considerations of the process?
Horror is hard, at least for me, because the thing with the stories that I write, I want the surprise to be within the story. I don't really want to give it away on the cover. So a lot of times that's pretty much why I usually leave it up to the artist to come up with the concept And if I say, look, I really don't want the monster to be given away on the cover, because I do a lot of the fiction that I write are monster stories. They're not just vampires or werewolves. They're, man-eating plants. They're cockroaches that do all sorts of things. Spiders. In fact, I did one book cover I had with the guy. His eyes were sewn shut, and there was a Australian funnel web crawling out of his mouth, just to kind of get people interested in going into the book to see it. But I mean, fantasy and science fiction is so gorgeous when it comes to covers. But horror, I don't want to give the magic away, but sometimes you have to.
It's kind of also a very, very, very fine line with covers as far as going from grim dark fantasy, which is like the real nihilistic horror fantasy, versus fantasy adventure. Those are two very different attitudes of fantasy to convey in a cover. Even if you have dark fantasy, that's not the same as grim dark. Not the same. You really want to try and convey, we're dark, but we're not going to make you depressed the entire time. But with grimdark, it's we are dark and we don't care, and you like it. So it's a lot to convey in images.
We spent a long time with Penduli Station looking at sci-fi covers and looking at what was at the top of the list of bestsellers for sci-fi covers. And they have planets, by the way. They always have planets. And so we have a planet. And it's a beautiful planet. But that was one of the things that we knew was going to be there. And it's themed across everything. Because you're right, looking at genres matters so much. Particularly in fantasy, you're so right. Between like highbrow fantasy, high-end fantasy to lighthearted, two totally different. Your cover better can portray which one it is, because neither usually there's not a lot of people that like both to read both. And I have a friend who wrote a high fantasy, and it's a beautiful, gorgeous story, and her cover is horrid. And it looks like a lighthearted fantasy. And I know that's why she's had problems with sales, because it doesn't look like it fits in its genre.
Yeah, and I guess I'll speak quickly to when we do sort of a number of like literary crossover books. So this is one that actually appeared in the fiction section of a lot of bookstores. We wanted it to appeal to genre readers, but ultimately a lot of literary fiction and like let's say non-genre fiction is more likely to have a design or typography driven cover. And so we went in that direction and we tend to go in that direction more for books that are, we hope, get cross-shelved in literary bookstores. And then there's the age range question. So this was our first YA book. We didn't want it to look exactly like what other YA books, but you definitely like, there's a particular look that is, or in particular trends that are mostly dominant within the YA industry. I guess the final example that I give is, this is a fantasy book, but it's also a romance crossover. And so we just like definitely went for things that we thought would make it most likely to appeal across to the other subgenres like romance that the book exists in. So there's like a ton of space that you need to cover, and all of it affects kind of both the art treatment that you'll be using and the typography and the effects and all of that. So it's a very, very holistic process. Awesome. So yeah, I guess I'd love anybody have any final thoughts that they want to close with, and then we'll get out of here.
I just want to say, do your research. Do your research about your artist if you're indie, and do your research about your genre, because like you said, that there's just certain ways some genres have to look to fit into them. Know what they are, so that you're not having to work extra hard. And then research your artists. Know what they look like. Know what their portfolio is. Know their eye. To me, research is always the key, and I guess we do that in our books too. So we're just never-ending researchers, is what we are.
And probably run ideas by your audience that you plan to sell it to. If you know someone who's in that age range or who likes this genre and you're an indie publisher, just ask, hey, so I'm thinking, what's your favorite cover of your books and that you like? And I would just say consult the people who actually buy the books.
Trust your artist. That's probably the best advice I can give. If you research your artists well and you believe in them, trust them, and don't be scared to let them know what you want. You know, they're there to help. That's the bottom line, and that's the great. Yeah, she made her appearance.
So sweetie.
I would just echo what everyone else has said, was just to research the artist. When you pick the artist for your cover, pick them because you like what you've seen of their work, and not just because they're someone who you actually know. Like, I have connection with them. Make sure that it's like, hey, this person's portfolio, what they have done, I can see that being on my cover and being a successful cover for me.
Yeah. I'd just like to give a brief shout out to everything that's going on Twitter and Instagram, which has been so amazing, both in terms of it looks like artists finding each other and forming community, but also, I guess, raising profiles of certain kinds of artists that we've been trying to look for a lot more Black artists, artists of color, and like just you can spend 1 second like looking for a hashtag and just fall into so many amazing artists from all over the world at different levels in their career, just getting out there and just creating the most beautiful and amazing things. So just like expand your horizons, and the tools to do that, I think, have gotten better in the last few years than ever before. Wonderful. Well, I think that's our time. So thank you all for joining us for this. Hope it's been helpful, and enjoy the rest of your Multiverse weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to Multivirtual 2020's Right Track. We hope you found the panel fun and you found it useful. Remember, for more about our panelists, please check the links below or head over to multiversecon.org, where you can find links to all of our guests. We've got so much great programming this weekend, so make sure to come out to our Discord server and hang out with us this weekend. We are at multiversecon.org/Discord. And if you go to that link, you can find all the information on how to join the Discord. And finally, would you like some Multiverse swag? When you go to the website, check out the store, because we have shirts, we have masks, we have posters, enamel pins. We've also got this really cool map that I cannot wait to come in, because I'm going to put it on the wall in my office. It's going to be awesome. Anyway, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you on the next panel.